The dust hangs in the air before you see the men. It coats armor, stings the eyes, and turns the rising sun over Gaugamela into a dull red smear. Somewhere ahead, tens of thousands of feet shift in the dirt, horses snort, leather creaks, and bronze catches the light. If you were standing here now, untrained and unarmored, you probably wouldn't survive more than a few heartbeats. This is not chaos, yet it is something more dangerous. Two armies fully aware of each other, waiting. On one side stands Alexander of Macedon, his force compact, drilled, and tense. On the other looms Darius III, commanding the largest field army the Persian Empire ever assembled for a single battle. Gaugamela in 331 BCE is not just a clash of kings. It is an officially recognized turning point in ancient military history, studied because of how deliberately both armies are built to fight very different kinds of wars. The Persian army functions as an imperial host, vast, multinational, and flexible, relying on cavalry dominance, missile troops, and shock units like Scythe chariots to overwhelm enemies by scale and intimidation. Its strength is obvious: numerical superiority and tactical breadth. Its weakness is coordination. Orders must travel through layers of commanders who do not share language, training, or doctrine. The Macedonian army, by contrast, is smaller but mechanically precise. Infantry phalangists trained to maintain formation under pressure, shields locked, sarissas angled like a moving wall. Cavalrymen, especially the companions, must ride, maneuver, and strike as a single organism. This demands years of discipline and mutual trust, skills rare outside professional armies. A lesser-known detail is that Alexander personally walked parts of the battlefield beforehand, noting ground firmness, an unusual level of commander involvement debated in modern scholarship. Academic debate still circles whether Gaugamela was won more by Persian mistakes or Macedonian superiority. But comparisons to earlier battles like Marathon or later clashes such as Cannae highlight something unique here. This is not a desperate defense or an ambush. It is a confrontation where preparation, structure, and intent are about to collide head-on, and the ground itself has been chosen to favor motion. As the armies finally resolve out of the dust, their shapes tell the real story. Darius has chosen the open plain deliberately, an officially recorded decision meant to let his cavalry and chariots operate without restriction. The Persian line stretches wide, far beyond the Macedonian frontage, an attempt to envelop rather than smash. Infantry anchors the center, but the army's true muscle lies on the wings: heavy cavalry, horse archers, and elite nobles positioned to crush flanks and roll inward. In theory, the Persian army functions like a flexible net, relying on simultaneous pressure rather than a single decisive blow. Its strength is reach. Its weakness is reliance on perfect timing. Opposite them, Alexander refuses symmetry. The Macedonian deployment is angled and layered, not straight across. The phalanx forms the core, deep and compact, designed to pin rather than pursue. Light infantry and missile troops are placed deliberately to protect gaps, and often overlooked. Detail that shows how integrated Macedonian combined arms had become by this point. Soldiers here need more than courage. They need spatial awareness, the ability to hold formation even when threatened from multiple directions. This is not a mob, it is a system. A strange side fact noted by ancient sources is that the Macedonians deliberately left small intervals between units, not as weakness, but as controlled elasticity, allowing forces to fold rather than break. This contrasts sharply with Persian formations, which emphasize mass and frontage. Modern historians still debate whether Darius fully understood the implications of this structure or underestimated Macedonian cohesion. Comparisons to other ancient armies such as the hoplite lines of classical Greece or the later Roman manipular system show Gaugamela as a transitional moment. The Macedonian army combines rigidity and flexibility in a way few others manage. The Persians, despite their experience, struggle to impose centralized control over such a vast force. As the signal to advance approaches, both sides are exactly what they have trained to be. The question is not whose army is larger, but whose system can survive being pushed beyond its assumptions when the movement begins. It is almost subtle. Alexander does not charge forward. Instead, the Macedonian line starts sliding to the right, an officially documented maneuver that has puzzled and fascinated historians for centuries. This is the oblique advance, not a retreat and not an attack, but a calculated drift meant to stretch the Persian left. To an untrained observer, it might look like hesitation. To the soldiers executing it, it demands absolute discipline. One misstep, one unit advancing too fast or lagging behind, and the entire formation could unravel. The Macedonian army functions here like a machine under lateral stress. The phalanx maintains cohesion while moving, shields overlapping. Sarissa steady despite uneven ground. This is a strength born of relentless drilling, but also a vulnerability. The farther the army moves sideways, the more exposed its own right flank becomes. Persian cavalry begins to respond exactly as Alexander anticipates. Moving outward to prevent being outflanked, the Persian system reacts aggressively, but predictably. Prioritizing space control over cohesion. This moment reveals the skills required of Macedonian soldiers beyond brute strength. They must trust commanders they cannot hear, maintain formation under psychological pressure, and ignore the instinct to chase skirmishers or cavalry probes. A lesser-known detail is that Alexander reportedly used hand signals and prearranged cues rather than shouted commands, a method still debated in academic circles due to source reliability. Comparisons are often made to later oblique tactics, such as Epaminondas at Leuctra, but Gaugamela differs in scale and intent. Alexander is not merely waiting one wing, he is reshaping the battlefield in real time. The strength of this approach is control that forces the enemy to react. The weakness is risk. If the Persians had broken through the Macedonian right early, the maneuver could have turned into disaster. Instead, the battlefield stretches, tension builds, and the Persian line begins to thin where it can least afford to. The Persian response comes quickly, but not cleanly. As their left wing extends to counter the oblique advance, gaps begin to open between units, an officially noted consequence of overextension in ancient cavalry-heavy armies. What was meant to be a smooth lateral shift becomes a series of localized movements, each commander reacting to what he sees rather than to a unified plan. The Persian army still functions, but now as fragments instead of a single organism. Its strength flexibility starts to become a weakness. Persian cavalry presses hard against the Macedonian right, forcing light troops and reserve units into constant motion. These soldiers need adaptability and endurance more than raw power, rotating in and out of pressure points to prevent collapse. A strange but telling detail from the sources describes Persian chariots being rendered ineffective, not by direct assault, but by carters deliberately opened by Macedonian infantry, allowing the vehicles to pass harmlessly through before being neutralized. This tactic is still discussed in academic debate, especially regarding how preplanned it truly was. As pressure increases, Persian command and control begins to fray. Messages take longer to move. Units commit forward without support. In contrast, Alexander's forces maintain internal coherence even while under stress, a key difference when compared to other ancient armies like the Achaemenid forces at Issus, or later Hellenistic hosts that relied more heavily on mercenaries. The Macedonian system rewards initiative within strict boundaries. The Persian system requires coordination that is now breaking down. This is the critical functional shift of the battle. The Persian line is no longer a wall, but a series of segments, each vulnerable to penetration. The weakness is not bravery or equipment, but timing. Soldiers trained for mass shock and pursuit now find themselves reacting to threats that appear and vanish as the dust thickens and the lines bend. The space Alexander has been seeking finally begins to exist, not behind the Persians, but within them. Alexander does not hesitate when the moment appears. The gap in the Persian line is narrow, unstable, and fleeting, but it is enough with an officially recorded signal. He pivots from lateral movement into forward shock, leading the companion cavalry in a tight wedge aimed directly at the heart of Persian command. This is not a wild charge. It is a controlled acceleration, horses align knee to knee, riders trained to maintain formation at speed. The Macedonian army here functions as a precision strike force, converting battlefield geometry into decisive Violence. The strength of this maneuver lies in concentration. Rather than grinding down the entire Persian army, Alexander targets its center of gravity, Darius himself. The weakness is obvious. If the wedge stalls or is enveloped, the elite core of the army could be destroyed. Companion cavalrymen require exceptional horsemanship, situational awareness, and the ability to fight in close order, skills few ancient armies demanded so consistently. A lesser-known fact is that these cavalry units trained together socially and politically, reinforcing cohesion beyond the battlefield. Academic debate often compares this charge to other shock tactics, such as Roman cavalry support at Zama or later cataphract assaults. But Gaugamela stands apart because the strike is self-created. Alexander does not exploit an accidental opening. He manufactures it through movement and pressure. Persian troops attempt to close the gap, but fragmented command makes coordinated resistance impossible. As the wedge drives forward, the psychological effect multiplies. Dust, noise, and sudden proximity to the Macedonian king destabilize Persian leadership. Darius's position, once protected by depth and numbers, now feels exposed. In contrast, two armies that rely on attritional superiority, the Macedonians, demonstrate how morale and command integrity can outweigh numerical strength. The battle has not ended, but its outcome is now being decided in a space measured in meters, not miles. The collapse does not come all at once. It ripples outward from the center. As Alexander's cavalry surge threatens Darius directly, the Persian king turns and withdraws, an officially recorded decision that instantly alters the battle's logic. Persian units do not rout because they are destroyed, but because their organizing principle vanishes, an army designed to function around royal presence and layered command suddenly lacks its anchor. This is a critical weakness in monarch-centered systems, one seen again in later armies from Achaemenid successors to medieval feudal hosts. Macedonian forces attempt pursuit, but here the limits of even Alexander's system appear. The army's strength cohesion now restricts speed. The phalanx cannot chase, and cavalry must decide between continuing pressure or turning back to stabilize the field. Soldiers require judgment as much as aggression, knowing when pursuit becomes vulnerability. A strange side note preserved in ancient accounts suggests Alexander briefly considered abandoning pursuit to secure the battlefield fully, highlighting his constant balance between ambition and control. Comparisons to other battles, such as the Roman pursuit after Cannae or Persian victories earlier in imperial history, show how rare it is for a victorious army to maintain discipline. At this stage, Macedonian success lies not in annihilation, but in preservation of function. Persian forces still fight on the wings, but without central coordination. Their efforts dissolve into isolated actions. Gaugamela's legacy is immediate and long-lasting. The Persian Empire effectively loses its ability to resist strategically, not because every army is destroyed, but because confidence, leadership, and systemic coherence are shattered. Academic debate continues over whether Darius's flight was rational or fatal, but most agree that once the oblique attack succeeded, the structural outcome was inevitable. The battlefield grows quieter, the dust settles, and the shape of the ancient world shifts not through brute force alone, but through deliberate, disciplined manipulation of space and movement. Gaugamela remains one of history's most studied battles because it demonstrates how tactics can overwhelm numbers without relying on chance. Alexander's oblique attack was effective not because it was clever in isolation, but because it was embedded in a system designed to exploit human and organizational limits. The Macedonian army functioned as a network of mutually supporting parts: phalanx, light troops, cavalry, and command, each aware of its role and its boundaries. This allowed flexibility without chaos, a balance few ancient armies achieved. The Persian army, despite immense resources and experience, was structurally vulnerable. Its strength, scale, diversity, and mobility required centralized coordination that could not survive sudden disruption. Once the line stretched and command fractured, no local success could restore coherence. This does not diminish Persian soldiers' skill or courage. Rather, it highlights how system design determines battlefield outcomes. Effectiveness also depended on soldier capability. Macedonian troops needed discipline, spatial awareness, and restraint, while Persian forces excelled in mobility and shock but were less prepared for adaptive defense. Compared to other ancient armies, Alexander's force anticipates later professional systems more than contemporary rivals. Ultimately, Gaugamela proves that victory is not just about weapons or bravery, but about shaping enemy decisions. The oblique attack worked because it forced Persia to respond on Macedonian terms. That lesson control the battlefield, and you control the outcome echoes through military theory to this day.